When I was 14 years old, my parents had finally started trusting me to stay home alone on weeknights when they had their weekly date nights. We lived in what I'd consider a pretty safe suburban neighborhood in Ohio. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained houses, the kind of place where people leave their bikes unlocked and kids walk to school by themselves. It's the type of community where nothing really bad ever happens, which is probably why my parents felt comfortable leaving me alone at that age. This particular night was a Thursday in October. My parents were going to dinner and a movie, so they wouldn't be back until around 11 p.m. They left me money for Chinese food and told me to make sure all the doors were locked before I went to bed. Standard instructions that I'd heard dozens of times before. I should mention that our house sits pretty far back from the street, with a long driveway that curves through some trees before you can see the front door. During the day, it's actually really nice and private, but at night it can feel pretty isolated, especially when you're by yourself. I spent most of the evening doing homework and watching TV. Around 8 p.m., I decided to order dinner from this Chinese place that we used all the time called Golden Dragon. I'd probably ordered from them 50 times before with my parents, so I knew exactly what I wanted and how much it would cost. When I called, the woman who answered sounded different than usual. Normally, it was this older lady who knew our order by heart, but this time it was a younger-sounding woman who seemed kind of distracted. She took my order and said it would be about 45 minutes for delivery. While I was waiting, I settled in to watch some movie on cable. I remember it was one of those cheesy horror movies from the 80s, which is ironic, considering what happened later. I was about halfway through when I heard a car coming up our driveway. I looked at the clock and realized it had only been about 30 minutes since I ordered, which seemed fast, but I figured maybe they weren't busy. I grabbed the money my parents had left me and went to the front door. When I looked through the peephole, I could see a guy standing on our porch holding what looked like a bag of food. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled down low, and I couldn't really see his face clearly. What struck me as odd was that I didn't recognize him, and I'd seen most of the delivery drivers from Golden Dragon before. I opened the door, leaving the chain latch connected, and asked him what the total was. He said $28.50, which seemed about right, but when he handed me the bag through the gap in the door, something felt wrong. First, the bag didn't smell like Chinese food at all. It just smelled like nothing. Second, when I looked closer at the guy's face, I could see he was much younger than most of their drivers, maybe early 20s, and he had this weird smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You by yourself tonight?" he asked, still holding that strange smile. Every instinct I had told me not to answer that question. My parents had always taught me never to tell strangers when I was alone, so I said, "No, my parents are just upstairs." "That's funny," he said, and his smile got wider, "because I've been watching your house for about an hour, and I haven't seen any cars come or go. Just you walking around inside." My blood went cold. I tried to close the door, but he had his foot wedged in the gap, preventing it from shutting completely. That's when I noticed that the food bag he'd handed me was completely empty. "I think there's been a mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't from Golden Dragon." "You're right," he said, pushing against the door a little harder. "It's not from Golden Dragon. I don't work for Golden Dragon, but I do know that you're home alone, and I know that your parents won't be back for a while." I dropped the empty bag and threw all my weight against the door, trying to force it closed, but he was stronger than me. Through the gap, I could see him reaching into his jacket pocket for something. That's when I remembered that my dad had installed a security system the year before, complete with a panic button by the front door. I slammed my hand against it, and immediately the loudest alarm I'd ever heard started blaring throughout the house. The guy jerked his foot back like he'd been electrocuted and ran toward the driveway. I slammed the door shut and turned all the locks, then ran to the living room window to see if I could see where he went. His car was still in our driveway, but I couldn't see him anywhere. The security system automatically called the police, and I could hear sirens approaching within a few minutes. But the guy must have heard them too, because by the time the officers arrived, both he and his car were gone. The police took a report and searched the property, but they didn't find any sign of him. They did find footprints under several of our windows, like someone had been walking around the house looking inside. The footprints led from the driveway around the entire perimeter of the house and back to where his car had been parked. When my parents got home, they found me sitting in the living room with 2 police officers, still shaking. The officers explained what had happened and recommended that my parents not leave me alone for a while. We called Golden Dragon the next day to see if they had any record of a delivery to our address the night before. They said they had no record of any order from us, and that all of their drivers were older men who had been working there for years. The police never caught the guy, and we never found out who he was or what he wanted. But I'm pretty sure I know what would have happened if I hadn't hit that panic button when I did. My parents didn't let me stay home alone again until I was 16, and even then, they made sure I had pepper spray and that all the security cameras were working. I still get nervous when I hear cars in the driveway at night, even now that I'm an adult with my own place. This happened when I was 19 during my sophomore year of college. I was home for winter break, staying at my parents' house in rural Vermont. The house is pretty isolated, about a quarter mile from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by woods on 3 sides. It's the kind of place that's beautiful during the day, but can feel pretty creepy at night, especially in winter, when the trees are bare and you can see further into the forest. My parents had gone to visit my grandparents in Florida for 2 weeks, and I decided to stay behind because I had a job at a local ski resort that I didn't want to give up. They were hesitant to leave me alone in such an isolated house, but I convinced them I'd be fine. I was 19 after all, and I'd grown up in that house. The first week went by without any problems. I'd work at the resort during the day, come home, make dinner, and spend the evenings reading or watching movies. It was actually kind of peaceful having the whole place to myself. But during the second week, I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. Little things at first, like the outdoor motion sensor lights turning on at random times during the night. I'd look out the window when it happened, but I never saw anything that would have triggered them. I figured it was probably just deer or other animals wandering through the yard. Then I started finding footprints in the snow around the house. At first I thought they might be from the mailman, or maybe someone from the oil company checking the tank. But these prints were everywhere, under the living room windows, around the back porch, even near my bedroom window on the 2nd floor, which you'd have to climb a tree to reach. I called my dad to ask if he was expecting anyone to come by the house, but he said no. He suggested that maybe it was one of our neighbors checking on the place, which seemed plausible, so I didn't worry too much about it. But then, on Wednesday night of the 2nd week, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of something tapping against my bedroom window. It was a rhythmic tapping, like someone was gently knocking with their fingernail or a small stick. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor, and there's no balcony or roof ledge that someone could stand on to reach that window. The only way to get up there would be to climb the big oak tree that grows next to the house, which seemed unlikely in the middle of winter. I lay in bed listening to the tapping for maybe 10 minutes, too scared to get up and look. Eventually it stopped, and I managed to fall back asleep. I convinced myself it had been a branch scraping against the glass in the wind. The next morning, I found more footprints in the snow around the base of the oak tree, and there were scuff marks on the bark where someone had clearly climbed up. There were also prints leading from the tree to various windows around the house, like someone had been doing a circuit, checking each room. That night, I made sure all the curtains were closed and all the doors and windows were locked. I even moved a chair in front of the front door just in case. I was starting to feel like someone was watching me, and I didn't like it. Around midnight, I was in the living room watching late-night TV when I saw something that made my heart stop. There was a shadow moving past the living room window, but it was moving wrong. Instead of walking by like a normal person would, it was moving slowly and deliberately, like someone was deliberately trying to look inside without being seen. I turned off the TV and all the lights, then crept over to the window to peek through a gap in the curtains. I could see a figure standing about 20 feet from the house, just at the edge of where the porch light reached. It was definitely a person, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes and what looked like a ski mask or balaclava. The person was standing perfectly still, just watching the house. I watched them for maybe 5 minutes and they didn't move at all. It was like they were waiting for something. Then, slowly, they started walking around the perimeter of the house. I could track their movement by following them from window to window. They would stop at each window for about a minute, then move on to the next one. When they got to the back of the house, I lost sight of them. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering to the dispatcher that there was someone prowling around my house. She said she'd send an officer, but warned me that it might take 20 minutes or more because of how remote our location was. While I was waiting for the police, I heard the back door rattling like someone was trying the handle. Then I heard footsteps on the back porch, moving from the door to the windows. The person was testing every possible way into the house. I ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom, which has the best view of the driveway, and watched for the police car. The rattling and footstep sounds continued downstairs for about 15 minutes, then suddenly stopped. When the officer finally arrived, I watched from the bedroom window as he searched the property with a flashlight. He found the footprints I'd been seeing, along with fresh ones that circled the entire house. He also found what looked like tool marks around the back door, like someone had been trying to pry it open. But whoever it was had disappeared into the woods before the officer arrived. He took a report and advised me to stay somewhere else for the rest of the week, but I didn't really have anywhere to go. Instead, he gave me his card and told me to call immediately if I saw or heard anything else. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my parents' bedroom with a baseball bat, watching the windows and listening for any sound. Every time the house creaked or the wind blew, I was convinced someone was trying to get inside. The prowling continued for the next 3 nights. Each night, the person would show up around midnight and spend an hour or more walking around the house, testing doors and windows. I called the police each time, but they never arrived fast enough to catch whoever it was. On Sunday night, the person got bolder. Instead of just prowling around outside, I heard them on the roof, walking back and forth above my bedroom. Then I heard scratching sounds, like they were trying to remove one of the roof tiles or find another way inside. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I called my parents and told them what was happening. They immediately booked a flight home and told me to pack a bag and go stay at a hotel until they got back. As I was packing, I heard the footsteps on the roof again, but this time they moved to directly above where I was standing. It was like the person knew exactly where I was in the house and was following me from room to room. I grabbed my stuff and ran to my car, not even bothering to turn off any lights or lock the door behind me. As I was backing out of the driveway, I saw a figure drop down from the roof and land in the front yard. In my headlights, I could see it was a man in dark clothes, but I couldn't make out his face because of the ski mask. He stood there watching me drive away, not moving, not running, just watching. My parents came home the next day, and we called the police to do a thorough search of the house and property. They didn't find any evidence of forced entry, but they did find a lot more footprints and what looked like a makeshift campsite about a quarter-mile into the woods behind our house. We never found out who it was or why they were targeting our house. The police suspected it might have been someone who knew my parents were away and thought the house was empty. But the fact that they kept coming back night after night, even after they knew I was there, suggests they might have been specifically interested in me. My parents installed a much better security system after that, complete with cameras and motion detectors, and I never stayed alone in that house again, even as an adult. Something about the way that person moved, so deliberate and patient, still gives me chills when I think about it. This happened last summer when I was 22, just after I graduated from college. My girlfriend Emma and I decided to rent a cabin in the mountains of North Carolina for a long weekend. We wanted somewhere remote and peaceful, where we could disconnect from everything and just enjoy each other's company before we both started our new jobs. We found this place online that looked perfect, a small log cabin about an hour outside Asheville, surrounded by forest, with no neighbors for miles. The owner said it was completely off the grid, no Wi-Fi or cell service, which was exactly what we wanted. The drive up was beautiful but pretty remote. The last 10 miles were on increasingly narrow dirt roads that wound through dense forest. By the time we reached the cabin, we hadn't seen another car or building for at least 30 minutes. The cabin itself was exactly what we'd hoped for, rustic but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a big deck overlooking the valley. We spent Friday evening getting settled, making dinner, and just enjoying the peace and quiet. Saturday was perfect. We hiked during the day, explored the woods around the cabin, and spent the evening on the deck watching the sunset. By the time we went to bed around 11 p.m., we were both completely relaxed and happy. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the deck outside our bedroom. At first I thought it might be an animal. Bears and deer are common in that area, but the footsteps were too regular, too deliberate. They sounded human. I listened carefully and could hear someone walking slowly around the perimeter of the cabin, stopping occasionally like they were looking through the windows. Emma was still asleep next to me, and I didn't want to wake her unless I was sure something was wrong. The footsteps continued for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. I waited another 10 minutes, listening, but didn't hear anything else. I convinced myself it had been my imagination, or maybe just the old wood settling, and eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, Emma and I were having coffee on the deck when she mentioned that she thought she'd heard someone walking around outside during the night. That confirmed that I hadn't imagined it, but we both figured it had probably been an animal or maybe a lost hiker. But when we walked around the cabin to investigate, we found something that made us both nervous. There were clearly human footprints in the soft dirt around the cabin, and they followed the exact path I'd heard the night before. The prints circled the entire cabin, stopping at each window. What made it even more unsettling was that the prints were barefoot. Who walks around barefoot in the woods at night? We decided to drive into town for lunch and supplies, partially to get away from the cabin for a while. In town, we stopped at a general store to buy some groceries, and I mentioned to the elderly man behind the counter that we were staying at the cabin we'd rented. When I described the location, his expression changed completely. He asked if we'd had any visitors during the night, which struck me as a strange question. When I told him about the footprints, he got very serious. He said that over the past few years, several renters at cabins in that area had reported similar experiences. Someone, or multiple someones, living in the woods and approaching rental properties at night. Most people just heard footsteps or found footprints, but a few had actually seen people watching their cabins from the tree line. According to him, the local police thought it might be homeless people or survivalists living off the grid in the national forest land nearby. But whoever they were, they seemed particularly interested in rental cabins where tourists were staying. He suggested we consider cutting our trip short, but Emma and I decided we didn't want to let some random person ruin our weekend. We bought some supplies, including a flashlight and an air horn for emergencies, and drove back to the cabin. That evening, we made sure all the windows and doors were locked before we went to bed. We also moved our car keys to the bedroom with us, just in case we needed to leave quickly. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps started again. This time, they were more aggressive, faster and heavier, like someone was no longer trying to be stealthy. Emma woke up immediately and grabbed my arm. We both lay there listening as the footsteps circled the cabin twice, then stopped right outside our bedroom window. We could hear breathing, heavy and deliberate, like someone was standing inches from the glass. Then came a sound that I'll never forget. Fingernails scraping against the window, slow and rhythmic. It went on for maybe 5 minutes, and we were both too terrified to move or make a sound. After the scraping stopped, we heard the footsteps move to the front door. The person tried the handle several times, then started pushing against the door like they were testing how sturdy it was. That's when I decided we needed to get out of there. I whispered to Emma to get dressed as quietly as possible while I gathered our essential stuff: keys, wallets, phones. We had already packed most of our things earlier in the day, so it only took us a few minutes to get ready to leave. The problem was that our car was parked right in front of the cabin, and we'd have to go out the front door to reach it. Whoever was outside would definitely see us. We waited until the footsteps moved to the back of the cabin, then quickly but quietly opened the front door and ran to the car. I've never been so grateful for remote car locks. I hit the button while we were still 10 feet away so the doors would be unlocked by the time we reached the car. Just as we were getting in, we heard shouting from behind the cabin. Deep, angry-sounding yells that didn't sound like words, more like animal noises. Then we heard crashing sounds, like someone was running through the brush toward us. I started the car and floored it down the dirt road, not even bothering to turn on the headlights until we were well away from the cabin. In the rearview mirror, I could see a figure standing in the road behind us, but it was too dark to make out any details. We drove straight through the night to Emma's apartment, not stopping until we were back in civilization. The next morning, I called the cabin owner to explain why we'd left early. He seemed genuinely concerned and said he'd contact the local sheriff to report the incident. A few days later, he called me back to say that the sheriff's department had investigated and found evidence that someone had been camping in the woods near the cabin for an extended period. They found a makeshift shelter, food scraps, and personal items, but whoever had been staying there was gone. The owner refunded our money and said he was going to install better security measures before renting the cabin again. He also mentioned that 2 other couples had reported similar experiences at nearby cabins over the past month. Emma and I still go on weekend trips together, but we're much more careful about choosing places that aren't completely isolated. There's something about knowing that someone was watching us, stalking us in the middle of nowhere, that changed how safe we feel in remote locations. Sometimes I wonder what that person wanted, or what might have happened if we'd stayed. But honestly, I'm glad we didn't find out.